We're live.
Let's see. Yeah, they're live now. Okay. Hi everyone. It's your host for tonight, Mitko from DIY Conspiracy. It's a website which is focusing on DIY punk and hardcore. And this week it's kind of special because it's the Trans Awareness Week, and we're covering a lot of bands with trans and non-binary members. So check it out at DIYconspiracy.net. And this week it's kind of special because it's the Trans Awareness Week, and we're covering a lot of. Hey Jay, can you just turn down the volume?
Is that my thing? Yeah, sorry.
So check it out at DIYconspiracy.net. It's kind of special. Okay, I think we're cool now. Okay. So yeah, tonight we have Jay Kerr from Punk Ethics. So let's start, and can you present yourself and what is Punk Ethics and why it's important to care about ethics in punk scene.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to meet you and great to meet everyone who's watching today. Like I say, I'm Jay from Punk Ethics. We are a small collective based in London, in the UK, and our basic idea of Punk Ethics is to promote kind of political action in the punk scene. The idea came about 5 years ago. I developed this idea of doing something that promoted punk in a way. As we all know, punk is a really political sort of scene generally. Politics is generally at the heart of punk, especially radical politics, anarchism and that kind of thing. But our idea was to, rather than just doing benefit gigs over and over again, which I've done in the past, and different causes and stuff, just try and think about ways we could do something different that didn't just involve, going into setting up shows, getting people along, handing out literature and stuff like that. We wanted to see what we could do beyond that. So sort of like put a bit of direct action into punk and get people motivated in different ways. So we called it Punk Ethics because there is arguably an ethics to punk. Certainly kind of anarchist ethics and radical politics ethics. That we're, punk is against oppression, in favour of the underdog. We like to support groups that are fighting against the system, and a lot of punk lyrics sort of like reject that. And so it was really just trying to encapsulate that in a way that does something slightly unique, maybe. Certainly not saying we're unique in the world. I'm sure there are other groups that do similar stuff, but we just had the idea to do something new. So a few of us got together and started doing, we set up the social media pages and all that sort of stuff and started putting the word out. And very quickly we came across this idea of we came across a bit of news about a beer company, a brewery called Brewdog, which some of you might have heard of. They do a drink called Punk IPA, which is alright, it's a nice drink, if you like IPA. And they were a small brewery, an independent brewery based up in Scotland, that apparently I've heard the idea behind the Punk IPA drink was that they wanted to do to the brewery industry what the Sex Pistols done to punk, what done to the music industry, what punk done to the music industry was kick everything up the arse, throw everything in the air and really cause a ruckus sort of thing. So they were the bad boys of the beer industry rather than the old men sitting around drinking. They were like the young punks, hence the punk IPA. Which was cool, but we learned a story back in, I think it was around 2016. It came out in the newspapers that there was some people up somewhere in, I think it was Birmingham or somewhere in England, wanted to open a bar. And they wanted to call their bar Draft Punk, which is obviously a play on the band Daft Punk, yeah. So not really a connection to punk per se, but they had this cool idea for a name, and thought, yeah, we'll do that. Put all their efforts into it, and I'm sure plenty of people know what it's like to try and set up their own company. A lot of hard work goes into it, and you risk a lot of money and stuff like that. So they've done all this, and then this brewery called Brewdog, who were getting very big at the time, and I think they had a huge amount of shares bought by some corporation. They weren't even particularly independent anymore at this point, I think. They sent them a cease and desist letter, a legal letter from solicitors and lawyers saying you can't use the word punk in the name of your bar because we own it. We own the term punk in anything in relation to food and drink. And that went out in the papers. It's like a story. I saw this, and loads of punks in the scene in London saw this and just, what? Who the hell do you think you are? You can't just say that you own the word punk. We do. We're the punks. We're where it comes from. A whole genre that's been going on for 40 years has been, promoting this thing. There is a whole punk ethics arguably behind it, and it's certainly not about sending lawyers in to tell people what they can and can't do when it comes to the word punk. So we sort of got together with a load of different promoters and gig organisers and all that sort of thing, and bands, and we put the word out to what was going on, and we wrote a kind of a fake cease and desist letter, like a mock cease and desist letter, which was supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek comedy thing, that said, it was sort of like written as if it was to Brewdog from punk. It was like, what do you think you're doing? Boy, you don't know the word punk, we do. And it's sort of, wrote there was stuff like, we've been watching you for a while, we've drunk your beer, your lager's alright, whatever, but you can't take the name punk from us, And basically said, you need to cease and desist, and sent that out to the press. But we put the word out around the world and managed to get about 200 bands from literally California to Japan to sign this open letter to Brewdog from punk, and just sent it out to the world and sort of told them what we thought would be it. So that was the kind of tongue-in-cheek political action that we thought was what punk needed. Beyond the gigs and stuff like that, you can do little things like this to niggle away at the status quo and to niggle away at big, powerful corporations that Brewdog were fast becoming, and they're now one of the biggest breweries in the UK. So certainly part of the new generation of hipster beers. So that was our first little thing. We got like bands like Boyd Malloy, Doom, TV Smith, loads of bands to sign up to this. It was a nice little action. So that was sort of the starting point for punk ethics and what we did. And alongside that, we started doing benefit gigs for various causes and putting the word out, and started making little videos and stuff. And then the next thing that came along was something called Trespass, which some of you might have seen. There's a documentary on YouTube about this. We basically took over the River Thames, the beach of the River Thames. At low tide, when the water goes out, a beach appears on the River Thames. When the tide comes in, it's just a huge river, but low tide, it's a little beach. And the reason why we've done this was there's a comedian in the UK called Mark Thomas, who's a political comedian. He's an old punk, actually. He's a bit of an anarchist type guy, who's been around for donkeys years now. He does political actions where he does various stunts and then builds a stage show around it to tell people and writes books and stuff like that. He's absolutely fantastic. As an example of the kind of things he's done, every year in London there's a massive arms fair, SEDECI, something like that, some arms fair, whatever the acronym is, where all the companies in the world that make weapons of mass destruction, effectively, the kind of people that punks certainly have been protesting against for the past 40 years, they get together in London, a big convention centre, and sell each other bombs and stuff like that. He went in there and set up a fake weapons company to try and highlight what is going on and in various ways expose the corruption and the hideous stuff that goes on in these places, and how many governments, including the British government, are complicit in the actions that lead to the deaths of thousands of people across the world. And then he wrote he'd done this political action, and he wrote stage shows and bring it to the people, and wrote book fairs, and he's done loads of this sort of stuff. So his new show is called Trespass, and it was focusing on the so in the UK there are trespass laws around where you can and can't go, and the public have right to access some places. Some places are absolute designated law that people have free right to roam in those areas. There are certain pathways in the UK that you can walk along, cut through private land, and the public has an absolute right to be there. And there are places where you think the public has the right, that it's a public space because the public can access it, but actually it's owned by corporations. Corporations and trusts and various private bodies actually own this. So the example he was using was the South Bank of the River Thames. There's an area called South Bank in London, it's in the south of the river, which is a beautiful walkway that you can walk along, and there's restaurants and bars and stuff and various theatres and stuff along there. And so it seems like the public have right of access, but actually the land you're walking on is owned by these various private bodies. So he was organising some sort of direct action stuff on that land to highlight this as an issue, that what we think is public right of access is actually not. And in some places where there is public right of access around the country, private corporations have built on them and stop people getting access to them in various ways. So he did a show where he got about 100 people together and marched them down to the River Thames, went to a certain area where we had to walk into a building, into a big office block, because they built the office block along one of these public rights of way, and made it, and they managed to get away with it by creating a little garden area, which was technically the public land, and the public had right of access, but if you walk past it, you wouldn't know, just a big corporation. There's a tiny bit of writing on the door that says public have right of access between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So he marched 100 people through the office onto this garden, sat them all down, had a big picnic, done a big comedy show and stuff like that. And that's where we sort of discovered his new show. And chatted to him afterwards and said, this is absolutely fantastic, we'd love to get involved in this in some way. So we said, how about doing that? He mentioned in the show that the beach of the River Thames is one place that seems to be an area where the public have right of access. We've since found out it's technically owned by the Queen, and the public don't have any right of access at all. But at the time we were like, okay, well, this sounds cool. How about we go down there with some punk bands and we'll set up a free gig on the beach of the River Thames and do a trespass show. It's literally what we did. So we got many people know the band Lloyd Polloy, and there's a band in the UK called Flowers of Flesh and Blood. And we turned up with about 500 punks, built a little mini stage, set up a whole gig, and for a couple of hours just took over the beach. And we filmed it and made a documentary about it. So again, this kind of punk ethics, it's political direct action mixed in with the music and taking a thing that we all love, which is punk gigs, punk music, punk bands, and creating this space that was protesting against the loss of public right of way, if you like. So we did that, and we got a film crew to film it and filmed the whole thing and made a little documentary out of it. And then the following year we went back with the band Conflict, and many people know the Restarts, and people know the band Shot, who were an upcoming band in London at the time. Another gig. It was a really fantastic experience. Loads of people in London absolutely loved it. It was a lot of hard work, and we quickly came up against the police presence and stuff like that. Security guards of the corporations that own the land on the riverside came along and tried to kick us off. But we said we had the right to protest, effectively. At the time, there was a thing called the Garden Bridge Project over the River Thames. Boris Johnson, who's now the Prime Minister, was the Mayor of London at the time, and he had endorsed and given backing to this project that his actress and some private interest groups had decided they wanted to build a bridge over the River Thames, bang in central London. It would be a garden, and be trees and plants on it. And it sounds very nice. and all that. But what they failed to point out was it would totally destroy the area that was already there. They'd have to dig up huge parts of the South Bank, including some rare trees that were there, just so that they could create this bridge. And then because it was built with a mix of public and private money, they would restrict access to the public. So it was another encroachment of the right to public access. You were building something which sounded very nice, but actually was environmentally ridiculous. Turns out insects don't go across water, and you can't plant trees on a bridge. You would end up just planting there and anchoring them to the bridge. It was an environmental disaster, an absolute shit show. So there was a local community group that were protesting against the Garden Bridge, and we joined forces with them to do the second show, the Conflicts, where we done a gig in their honour and sort of like help them advertise their cause. So yeah, that was Trespass 2. We sort of like built that whole project. So these ideas of little direct action things were what were the basis of punk ethics. And it's quite easy to make films and stuff nowadays, and the internet's certainly a brilliant way to get the message out in a way that wasn't there 20 or 30 years ago. So we can sort of do these direct action kind of things and get the word out to many people and hopefully inspire other people to do the same thing, and they can take it on and do similar projects. And the idea really is to get punk to be not just another music scene where all we do is go to bars and drink and listen to bands, but actually think about the wider world and what we can do in the wider world to influence society. And I mean, the Trespass thing was amazing just because it's central London. You've got St Paul's Cathedral on one side and the Oxo Tower on the other, and the South Bank is an absolute huge area for tourists. So while Lloyd were playing, hundreds of tourists gathered around on the bank up high while they're down the beach playing, and they just looked up and gave a big shout out to all these people. And Pete from Lloyd said something beautiful, something like, "You should all go home tonight and look up BB Crust Punk. It will change your lives." Yeah, that kind of, it was absolutely fantastic. And it's that kind of thing of influencing the wider society and getting the word out, because punk has a tendency in the wider society, outside of the DIY scene, to be something that happened years ago. It's something that your parents and your grandparents were into. It died in the 70s after the Sex Pistols split up, which we all know isn't the case. But trying to promote that in the wider world is something that needs to be done a bit more. So this kind of political direct action that we can do helps build that, So that was the general idea behind punk ethics in the early days. We then took it to a different level, and it became a matter of international solidarity. Come from these factories where people are hideously exploited. So I got to do some work with these people, and it opened my eyes to what was going on in Burma, which for the past 60 years, until 2010, was under a massive political dictatorship. In 2010, it started to open up. The military, until it controls it, the military government was still very much in control, but they started to open up slowly to outside influences. Prior to then, there was very little outside influence going into Burma. So where I've met sort of people through the work in Thailand and learned more about Burma, eventually I got the opportunity to go there. And like any punk around the world, the first thing you do when you go to another country is find out where the punks are. And in this case, it was going on the internet and MySpace back then, not even Facebook, where looking up punk online, found some punks, and there's a punk band called the Rebel Riot that were doing some amazing stuff out there. That was a sort of similar thing about direct action and taking punk in its political realm into a solidarity. And what they had done is they've been inspired by the Food Not Bombs movement in the States, and they heard about Food Not Bombs by doing a trip to Indonesia, and met punks there that fed people on the streets. Everyone doesn't know about Food Not Bombs. It's literally a very punk orientated thing where people just cook free food, go out on the streets and give out free to promote the concept of food rather than bombs, peace rather than war. And so they were inspired by that, took that back to Burma and started going out in the streets of Yangon, the capital of Burma, and giving out free food. And in Burma, there's a huge huge amount of homelessness, because unlike a lot of countries in Western Europe and in Europe generally and other places where there's a certain element of protection for homeless people through sort of state subsidies, I mean, it's not perfectly binding standards, but there is some certain social security elements in there. In Burma, there is very little, hardly anything. So you get kids sleeping in doorways and under bridges and stuff like that. So what they were doing was focusing solely on the homeless people in the area, just cooking free food and playing music. And when I eventually went to visit them, they took me out on the streets for one of their days doing the food and the bombs thing, and they literally got a guitar out and floods of kids, there were about 20 kids just appeared out of nowhere and came and sat down and ate the food and sang along with them with an acoustic guitar. It was a real special experience, and something I thought would be replicated around the world. So meeting them and going back to the UK, I really wanted to do something to support them, and Punk Ethics seems to be a perfect vehicle to do that through. So I had a chat with them, and I said, look, I do benefit gigs back in the UK. If I can get anyone to do a benefit gig, who would you want to do this? Who can I ask? And I was really worried they were going to say the Sex Pistols or something like that, or GBH or some band that was a bit out of my league to try and contact and say, hey, do you want to do a free gig? Luckily, they said the Restarts. I was so impressed because they lived down the road from me. So, hey, yeah, we can do that. Yeah. So we came back and I called up the Restarts and said they knew about the Rebel Right already, and said, yeah, brilliant, we'll do a gig. So again, with the means of filming things is quite easy nowadays and putting things online. We organised a big benefit gig, raised about £1,000, which is a huge sum in Burma, and filmed the whole thing and made a little 5-minute video of sort of international punk solidarity, sort of connecting Burma to the UK punk scenes, and sent the money out to help them develop their scene, and they can, spend it on equipment and stuff for their scene and help build their scene. So that sort of built a new relationship across borders with a country that few people in the UK really knew much about, and it opened up their eyes to what was going on in different parts of the world, beyond what you hear in the mainstream media and in the news. You get to see a real personal side of things, because you don't just see when bad shit happens and the news tells you something horrible happened on the other side of the world. You get to see people that are like you, people that have similar values to you, the punk ethics that you hold, other people hold on the other side of the world, and you can build solidarity between you. So, yeah, we ended up sort of working with them for a few years and doing a number of benefits and sending money out to them and just sharing stuff online about their different struggles and stuff like that. And eventually, we managed to organise a crowdfunder to bring the Rebel Riot over to the UK to play, which is absolutely fantastic, because I'm not too sure, but in terms of the UK, certainly, as far as I know, it's the first time a Burmese band had come to the UK, let alone a punk band, just anyone in that far away. We organised DIY gigs around the country in about 5 different major cities, got the punk scenes in each local punk scene in each city to organise a gig, and then just took them around. And every show was a little educational lesson in what life is like in Burma, and they had a film that someone had made about the Burmese punk scene called My Buddha is Punk. And we showed that before or after each show. We put the gig on, we got to chat to them and meet them, stuff like that. And they went home with a huge pot of money from these being benefit gigs, and they managed to invest that into their local scene. So they're doing absolutely amazing things out of Burma. During the COVID crisis, the last 6 months, the Rebel Riot and the collective around them, that are called the Rebel Collective, they've been doing sort of amazing, sort of more of the food not bombs work, but they've expanded from the homeless people. They've also connected to garment workers and sex workers and various different communities in their society that need support during the time of COVID. So they've really done amazing stuff. They've done a crowdfunder that raised £10,000, which is a huge sum, especially for a punk scene, sort of DIY organised thing, and put that out into the world, into their community, and invest it in providing food to different communities and organising more structured stuff in various places, including up in the Rakhine state, which is in the northwest near Bangladesh. I'm sure many people know about the genocide that happened in the Rakhine state of Burma, where the Burmese military were again under this kind of essentially fascist dictatorship by people. They went into this area in Burma, which is heavily populated by an ethnic Muslim minority, called the Rohingya, and basically exterminated them. And millions of people had to run for their lives and cross the border of Burma. To this day, there's still a huge camp in Bangladesh, across the border into Bangladesh. There's a huge camp of people who are just displaced because of what happened in Burma. And the punks with the Rebel Riot and the Rebel Collective have been doing loads of solidarity work in that area. They've helped organise the Food Not Bombs in that region, and just really living the punk ethics that people should be doing, to take this thing that we have of the punk rock, where we have these values and these principles that we sing about and we organise gigs and stuff. They're really putting them into action in the real life. So, yeah, we've been working with them for the past few years, and that led to a new campaign called Punks Against Sweatshops campaign, which I'm sure many people have heard about. Like I say, I worked with this anti-sweatshop campaign called No Sweat for about 20 years. Back in the day, we used to do a lot of benefit gigs and organise, stuff that promote the campaign. I should go back a bit. I should explain what a sweatshop is for people that might not understand. So, sweatshop is a word that is used in English to mean a factory where you work under hard conditions. So you work incredibly long hours, 12, 16 hours a day. You earn very little wages. You're on effectively a slave wage. The conditions you work in are often very unsafe, very horrible. You can find situations where fire escapes are locked up, so if there's a fire, you're trapped in the building, maybe on the third floor or stuff, things like that. And you often face abuse and harassment by the bosses, the employers, who really just want to try and get every piece of work they can out of you, because every t-shirt you make is profit for them while they're paying you this slave wage. So that's what a sweatshop is. Different words for it in different languages, but in the UK that's what we use. So No Sweat is a campaign that fights against that, and the argument the way they fight against that is by promoting trade unions. In some languages it's syndicates. Trade unions that workers can organise themselves and fight for their rights, but they can look to people around the world to build that solidarity, that international solidarity. The No Sweat is a small campaign group in London that will find out about workers in Thailand, for instance, if they're on strike and trying to fight against the oppressive conditions they have in a factory. No Sweat will raise that voice and do protests against brands that are making the clothes in those factories, like Nike or something like that. You go and stand outside the shop and protest, and they'll give out leaflets and all kinds of different things to raise awareness. And by making that international solidarity, the workers can point to what is happening in other countries and say, we're not alone. We are not just individual workers, we're a union, and we have the backing of people in London, New York, Paris, Sofia, something like that. All around the world where people stand together in solidarity, it helps the cause of the workers that are struggling and that fight for their rights. So with Punks Against Sweatshops, the idea really came when it was a similar thing to other stuff where it's like we sing about politics but don't necessarily always put it into direct action. We don't really go beyond the gig. You end up sort of preaching to the converted, where you're getting up on stage and saying like "fuck the bosses," stop exploitation or whatever. But the people who are hearing it are the people in the crowd, which already know this stuff, and it's not going beyond that. We looked at that and thought, okay, so what's the issue with the sweatshop issue? Well, bands all print T-shirts. They all print their band logo on a T-shirt, and that currency, that selling of T-shirts and merchandise at your gig is very much part of punk in helping DIY bands continue what they're doing. Because a lot of the gigs are often benefit gigs, so the money goes to a cause So it gives the bands just a little bit of extra money to get petrol in the van to get to the next gig, to put out the next record and whatever, which is great. But when you're singing about injustice and fuck the system and whatever else, but you're printing your band logo and those kind of messages on a t-shirt that is made in a factory, maybe somewhere in like Bangladesh, where the workers are getting paid a slave wage, they're being forced to work long hours, they're working in unsafe conditions, then the message on your t-shirt is meaningless. And what you've been doing is just sort of continuing the exploitation. You've been supporting it, effectively. So the idea of Punks Against Sweatshops was to acknowledge that that is happening, to admit that we're all guilty of it. Everyone around the world who has this, anyone who buys clothes has probably got sweatshop clothes, and no one is perfect. Everyone is a hypocrite. We all want to sort of like fight for our rights, but we're all letting ourselves down by engaging in this and continuing this process. So we wanted to try and open a conversation about this. And the way we did it was speaking to different bands that rely on these t-shirts, rely on the merchandise for their income, and say, get them speaking about it on record and make a little film about it to put it out into the world and see what we can do about it. And the answer isn't always buy an ethical t-shirt. That is basically, that is definitely a decent step, and it's certainly something that we endorse, but it's not always feasible. So the more important thing than worrying about what the label is in your t-shirt is worrying about who are the people making the t-shirts and what you can do to support them. Because at the end of the day, if the sweatshops don't exist, then people don't have their jobs, and the people want to fight, need their jobs to get money, but they don't want to be working in exploitative conditions. So what the result of that is what punks need to do, is work in solidarity with those workers around the world in the same way that groups like No Sweat do. And really kind of bring that into the punk scene, into the punk mentality, to add to punk ethics that idea that it's not just about what you wear, it's about who made what you wear and what you're doing to support them. So it's certainly, if you can buy an ethical t-shirt, that's better, because there's obviously a need to build an alternative industry. If there's a factory that is doing the right thing, paying workers well, giving them good conditions and not making them work long hours, then it's really important to support that, because they need the money like everyone else, and they'll go out of business without support. So we really need to try and build that whilst we're printing our t-shirts. But more importantly, is about building solidarity with the workers that are working in the sweatshops that are still stuck in this exploitation factory, So that was the idea with Punks Against Sweatshops, and what we ended up sort of doing was creating a little logo that bands can use to promote their stuff. So if you can buy an ethical t-shirt to print your band logo on, then go for it and you can advertise that. But also you can join the campaign to help promote workers' rights and get the word out there. So that was launched last year, and it was amazingly successful in terms of getting the word out. We managed to connect with people across the world. We had messages coming in everywhere from across Europe, from Japan, from Argentina, everywhere, people really supporting this idea. And so we ended up putting a web page on our website where we got bands send in their logo. If they supported the campaign, we'll put your logo up. You click on that, it will take you to the band's merchandise page, the band camp or their Facebook or their website. And you can buy their African merchandise or whatever. So it's that kind of like way of building a little economy within the punk economy of saying, okay, this is where you can go to get decent merchandise from bands that you love. And the more we build this, the more bands have joined, and the more the whole movement builds. That led us on to think, well, we could do an LP, we could do a benefit album, because punks do love a demo, a benefit CD. So we put together something earlier this year with about 40 bands, and it has some big names like Jello Biafra and Propagandy and Steve Ignorant and Crass and stuff like that on it, but also some small bands you've never heard of from around the world. So it's got a whole range of people. And it's pay what you want, it's on Bandcamp, you can download it, and the money we get from that is helping us build the campaign. We use, because of the impact of COVID, when we launched it, we managed to raise about £1,500, and we used half of that to send out to garment workers in Bangladesh to support their struggle with the COVID crisis. Because when COVID hit Bangladesh, all the factories closed down, and the workers that are on the lowest earning the most slave wages suddenly found they didn't have jobs, they didn't have an income. So we teamed up with a group out there called Operaggio, who were delivering food parcels to help people get through the COVID crisis. So yeah, that was a really powerful thing for us, really, to see that kind of work going on, to be able to contribute to that. And yeah, the album's done really well, it's still available, and we're hoping to do a new one in next year. So yeah, that is Punks Against Sweatshops. The newest campaign we've got going on is something that we haven't started promoting yet, but we're planning to promote in the near future. There's a guy, Basque punk. Basque is a region in Spain. It's actually an independent country, but it's part of Spain, if you like, if people don't know. I won't go into the politics of that because I'm not knowledgeable enough. But this guy is called Azul Luzeraga, if I pronounce that right. This is a punk who is a writer. He's a published author. He's a brilliant writer, I've been told, in Spanish and Basque. And he moved to Chile in South America back in, I think it's 2010 or something like that. And he obviously is he's a punk, he's political, he's an anarchist, and he wrote a blog talking about the experiences he saw in Chile against the way the government was treating the indigenous people there, whose name escapes me completely, but whoever it was, he went online and sort of wrote some articles on his blog about the oppression that was happening in that country, which is kind of things that punks and anarchists do, absolutely brilliant. What doesn't normally happen when you do that is you don't normally get the state raid your house. And what happened to Azul was the Chilean government decided they didn't like what he was writing, and they accused this foreigner of coming in and corrupting the youth of Chile, and they decided to arrest him. And in order to arrest him, they decided to plant bomb-making equipment and accuse him of being a terrorist. This is a guy who's like a well-known author in Spain, and one of the nicest guys you could ever meet, and certainly not a bomb-maker of any description. So he was arrested. He spent about best part of a year under kind of house arrest, I think. And the charges very quickly were dropped because it was discovered that at the time the bombs that exploded that they were accusing of being involved in, planting these bombs, he wasn't even in the country at the time. It's an absolute fabrication. It's completely made up by the government to arrest him. So he went to court. They took away some of those charges, but they kept the charges of making the bombs. And he was found guilty, but rather than give any sentence that actually you would think would be the consequences of bomb making, he was let out and he was just deported from the country straight away. It was just a way of kicking him out of the country. The problem is, sort of 10 years later, he's now labelled as a terrorist, and he's on Interpol as a terrorist, so he can't travel around the world freely. He travels to certain countries, he'll be arrested as a known person on Interpol and stuff like that. So he's trying to clear his name. And so part of this international punk solidarity, we felt it was important for us to help a fellow punk out there trying to do this, trying to fight the pain, essentially. And so he's doing this campaign where he's managed to get a case together to go to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And he's the first European, the first non-American, like Latin, South, North, Middle, Central America, the first European to get a case accepted by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. So he's taken the Chilean government to court to clear his name, to say, I'm not a terrorist, that you lied. And he has evidence, apparently, to suggest, to back up his claim that the police totally fabricated the evidence, planted with bomb-making equipment, and completely set him up. So we're going to help support him. We want to encourage people around the world to get involved in this campaign, to lend their support, because he needs he needs to show international solidarity so that when he goes to court, he's got backing of people around the world. And that's something that's you can hear more about on Ethics website and on our Facebook and social media pages and stuff like that. Yeah, I think I've been ranting for about 40 minutes, I think. So, feel free if there's any questions, if anyone wants to ask anything, or if anyone wants more of an explanation of what I've been talking about, happy to talk a bit more.
Yeah, thank you for this. I think I have a question now. When we talk about footnote bombs or supporting prisoners or supporting government or whatever industry workers, it's about solidarity as opposed to charity. But now in the situation with COVID, when we raise money for this, we raise money for that, we're doing it online with compilations on Bandcamp or whatever. Isn't it like also a bit of charity? And how do you define solidarity in a situation like this when we just stay at home and there are no benefit punk gigs?
That's an interesting point. I think I've wrestled with this a little bit myself because a lot of the solidarity, not charity stuff tends to be about raising money to give to people, which is kind of what Oxfam does and big organisations like that. I think the difference between the two comes down to it's about a grassroots level. But when you act in solidarity, you contact someone who's struggling, fighting for their rights or whatever it is, or struggling, living under an oppressive system or something like that. If you reach out to them and say, what do you need, how can we help you? Then that's an act of solidarity. What charity tends to be is someone in a position of power looks upon someone in a position of without power and decides that those poor people need our help. And therefore they just come up with the ideas and say, this is what we're going to do for you. They don't contact those people and say, how can we help you? And that's the difference between solidarity and charity, I understand, is that, especially, like I say, in times of COVID, where we're fundraising, like, take the example of the Burmese punks who done a crowdfunding thing in order to fund their campaign work. That was them organising themselves to get the money together to do work, really important work in their community. It wasn't a case of them looking to, I don't know, some government institution or some authoritarian body that's got a paid chief executive that decided that this is our new campaign, we're going to help these poor people down here. They've reached out themselves to people around the world and said, if you can give us a couple of quid, give us a few euros or whatever, and put it into this pot, we can do this with this money. And they do it, it's DIY, they do it themselves. So that is what I consider solidarity, not charity thing. It was interesting when we done a lot of the stuff with the Burmese punks a few years ago. We did a benefit gig to raise money for their work, and we managed to get a Burmese activist who lives in London now, who escaped oppression in the 80s from Burma. He was involved in the student uprising in 1988. And he had to flee for his life and get out of the country because he was going to be arrested by the government and locked away for life. So he'd end up in London. We invited him along and he got up on stage and, completely unprompted by us, said exactly that. He said, this is about solidarity, not charity. We don't want your charity, we want your solidarity. We want you to stand with us and help us raise our voice. So although we were fundraising to send money out to them to do stuff, we were helping raise the voice and raise awareness around what was going on, and that wasn't about the rich Western punks, deciding to help the poor people. That was about working together as equals and saying, "What can we do to help you?" and them saying, "This is what we need." And so I think that's the key difference. And it's the same with Azul, this new campaign we're working on. It's not about us saying, "Oh, here's our new pet project." It's about someone contacting us and saying, I've got this problem, I need support, can you work with me to help raise my voice around the world. So we're organising a campaign in support of him, and it's about working in solidarity, not just being a charitable institution.
Yeah, so buying ethical merch like t-shirts or stuff is very nice, but what about the skinheads with the Fred Perrys and the vegan Doc Martens, the straight edge kids with the Nikes? Do you think about stuff like pressure campaigns against these corporations or like certain brands? Like in the animal rights movement, the pressure campaigns against certain target like a corporation is very successful. So do you have any ideas in this direction?
I think there's different ways to do different things, and I think they're equally important. So I think the animal rights one in particular is really important. They've had some amazing success in organising people to put pressure on brands, on companies, especially like the animal vivisection thing, where they've got people to phone up companies and say, we're not going to buy, put pressure on the companies saying, we're not going to buy from you if you're supporting this. And it's led to companies taking their money out of animal vivisection and stuff. And that's been really successful, so that's great. In terms of the clothing thing, the Nike stuff, there was, the obvious thing to do with Nike and other big brands like that is to boycott. With No Sweat, what we discovered years ago very quickly was these corporations are global. They're hugely powerful because they exist in all countries. They're trans-global, they're not necessarily multinational, they're just all over. So they have the power to go from one country to another without, batting an eyelid, so to say. It's so easy for them to shut down operations in one country and go to another country because they don't own the factories, they just contract them. So if we find out there's a factory in Indonesia that's making clothes for Nike, and people start saying, okay, we're going to boycott you because of that factory, the reaction of Nike was just to cancel the contract with that factory and move to China or move to Thailand or somewhere else. And do exactly the same thing somewhere else. So it didn't become a viable campaign action to call for a boycott. That's why we promoted the workers' rights. You need to raise the voice of the workers. If there's a factory in Indonesia, you need to stand in solidarity and not tell people not to buy Nike, but tell people to demand Nike give them decent wages, better conditions. The basic laws that most people take for granted in the West. It's still ongoing. It's a struggle that hasn't ended in the last 20 years, but it's certainly something that's important to carry on doing. So, yeah, there's different ways of doing things. In terms of like brands, like you get cool brands like Dr. Martens and Fred Perry and stuff that you can have mixed feelings about, because I think Dr. Martens have started they shipped a lot of their stuff out to China, where, as far as I don't know the specifics, but the general feeling of work, anyone who ships their brand out to China to do that is probably using a sweatshop. The onus is on them to prove that their stuff is not made in a sweatshop, because the conditions in China are horrible across the board. And if you've got one factory that actually pays a living wage, you need to tell us about it, because we're going to just assume you're using a sweatshop. So with a brand like Doc Martens, the punk scene loves, we all have a pair of Doc Martens, it's the responsibility for the punk scene is to call on Doc Martens to say, what are the conditions like in your factories? Why are you using sweatshops? And if they say no, then they need to be transparent enough to open up and tell us how much the workers are getting paid, what conditions they're in, and they need to show us that. Otherwise, the assumption is they're using sweatshop labour. So with the Fred Perry's another interesting one because of the whole Proud Boys thing in the States, which was fantastic. I don't know if you saw, they basically put out a public statement denouncing Nazis, just going, don't wear our brand. We don't want you to wear our brand. We're going to discontinue the T-shirt that you're wearing because we hate you that much. And it's like, for a corporation like as big as Fred Perry to do that, it's absolutely fucking fantastic. And they know where their roots come from in the punk scene. And they've done a lot of great stuff in supporting the 100 Club, which you probably know is a big famous punk venue in the UK where punk really started and stuff. They've sort of done a lot of work to keep that afloat. That said, whether they make their T-shirts or the conditions they're making their T-shirts in, are they transparent about their conditions? Do they tell you what factory is made in and whether the workers are earning a living wage? And that's stuff we can all look into, and we can all contact these corporations and find out. And putting pressure on them to make sure they do commit to paying living wages, they do commit to decent conditions, and importantly do commit to allowing trade unions in their factories is the basic stuff we can do. That's kind of what the Punks Against Sweatshops campaign is encouraging. Is if you're in a band, you could get an ethical T-shirt print on it, great. If you're not in a band and you like wearing T-shirts, well, you can contact the company that is in the tag in your T-shirt and say who made your clothes and find out. And when you, whatever answer you get, you can go to an organisation like No Sweat or Clean Campaign, or in the States there's the United Students Against Sweatshops. There's loads of campaigns all around the world. You take that information and investigate further. So you can do your bit by reaching out to the company that you bought the thing from and find out the answer, and then contact the campaigners who are going to follow it up.
And what's the alternative for the people in these countries who don't want to work in the sweatshops? Are there any cooperatives or any alternatives to this kind of system?
In terms of the garment industry, it's limited. At the United Nations, was it the organisation for work, ILO, the International Labour Organisation, put out a report into co-ops in the garment industry, and they managed to identify about 6 or 7 co-ops around the world that were actually doing this, that were operating under decent conditions, decent wages, cooperatively, democratically. So if you can imagine, the garment industry is reported to be something like worth $3 trillion. There are hundreds of thousands of garment workers and factories around the world. And in terms of co-op, the biggest institution connected to the UN that's supposed to look after labour rights found 6. Doesn't bode well for what the alternatives are. Most garment workers on a day-to-day basis can't leave one factory and go and find a co-op. All they can do is go from one factory to another and hope the conditions are just a little bit better. In whatever conditions they find, it's probably better than the alternative, which is unemployment and destitution, which is what COVID has really exposed, is when these workers that are are suffering exploitation, and that meagre income is taken away, they're fucked. So this again goes back to why you can't boycott, you've got to build solidarity. Because none of these workers want to work in conditions that are this bad. No one goes to work, no one goes to work that says, well, I might have to do 12 hours. My boss is hitting me. I'm, losing fingers on the machine because the safety isn't there and stuff like that. No one goes, well, I'm doing this, but it could be worse. I could be on the streets. No one does that. They know what the alternative is, so they go to work. But no one wants to work in a shit situation. They want better. And throughout history, workers have fought for better. The whole trade union movement throughout Europe and America is about workers fighting for their rights and getting better conditions. And when you got things like factory fires, building collapses, and stuff like that, which is just people going to work to earn a basic, bare wage that they can barely survive on, and then they die in a factory fire because the factory didn't implement basic safety methods. It's just an absolute tragedy. And the only way to combat that is to build solidarity with those workers so they can fight for their rights.
Yeah, and now bigger bands like Propaganda, Stiff Ignorant of Christ, Petrol Girls are involved in the campaign. Do you see um, like interest from people who are not really into DIY punk scene, but more into the mainstream punk, let's say, into the campaign. And can you just talk about the reactions that you got from the people?
It's been a mixed bag of different things. Like the DIY scene has been solid. Like we've had across the world, we've had responses from different scenes saying this is a great campaign and they want to get involved and they promote it and stuff like that. It has gone beyond that in interesting ways. One was in Greece. We had a group. I don't know, do you have in Bulgaria, do you have a battle of the bands thing when the young, like teenagers get together and do a show?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. There was, in Greece, in Athens, I think, there was a battle of the bands at a university or a big high school where they were doing this. And a group of young activists, or a little group of young activists, done an intervention into this battle of the bands thing and played the Punks Against Sweatshops video with Greek subtitles to this audience of several hundred people that were there to see the battle of the bands, and made a little speech saying, what exploitation is and what the exploitation of the garment industry and how that connects to punk bands. So that was really amazing to see that hit the mainstream in that way, because as far as it wasn't a punk rock battle of the bands, it was just a local community battle of the bands. So that made a huge impression and really inspired us when we heard that story. We were blown away by it. We've had some other things, like there's a magazine in Germany called Visions magazine, which apparently a German friend of mine told me is a very big, glossy magazine. And they reached out to Propaganda to do an interview about the Punks Against Sweatshops campaign with George, the drummer of Propaganda. So he messaged us and told us what was happening. So I eventually got a copy of that and was like, oh my God, it's amazing, because this glossy mainstream magazine is featuring this little DIY campaign, stuff like that. In terms of the mainstream punk circuit, a lot of that's America, like No Effects and Rancid and all that sort of stuff is what we consider mainstream punk. There's I can't remember the name now. I think it's called Punk News, so it's one of these punk magazine, online punk magazines that's quite mainstream approach to that. We put out a press release saying the film was out there, and then it got picked up by the podcast version of this online magazine. I'm pretty sure it was Punk News, punknews.com or whatever. They do a podcast, and they talked about it on there, and it was interesting, their reaction to it. The guy said, oh yeah, this is still a thing. He'd sort of talked about it a bit, and they had a nice discussion on it, which was good to hear being talked about. But he had said that he felt like he'd forgotten that sweatshops still exist. And in the world of Trump and fucking climate change and all the other shit that's going on, this stuff took him back to the 90s and Naomi Klein's No Logo and the anti-capitalist movement of the 90s. And it was like, oh, yeah, it's still going on, okay. And he said it was nice to see punks taking it up as a subject and doing something about it. So it's getting out there, but we've still got a long way to go, because we've seen a bit of a slowdown in the bands that are signing up to the campaign. We got those big names. We got Jello Biafra and some others that we've reached out to and said,
yeah,
okay,
maybe we should reach out to the hip hop scene then.
Yeah, that's it. Well, this is the thing, like trying to reach those bands. Like, I've sent emails out to some of these bands and you get no response, and you're a bit like, okay, you probably get loads of emails, but yeah, there's something. Was it the Greg Graffin? Is it?
Yeah, Bad Religion.
Yeah, Greg Gurus. Yeah, Bad Religion guy. Yeah, who does Epitaph? Obviously, when the Black Lives Matter protest erupted, he'd done this amazing stuff where he identified it as an issue and something he wanted to engage with, and he put out a statement on his Facebook page saying he was going to promote more black bands and stuff, especially in the punk scene and whatever other genres Epitaph are doing now. I'm not too sure I don't follow. And I was really impressed with that. So I sent an email to the main info at Epitaph or whatever and explained what we're doing. It's like, yeah, this is fucking great. check this out. Nothing. No response at all, which was really disappointing. But by contrast, I did the same email or similar email to Ian Mackay of Fugazi, who runs Discord, yeah. And got a response, and he was like, "This is fucking fantastic, totally support it." But he said, "We don't do t-shirts. I've never done t-shirts, but I'm totally in solidarity with what you're doing, but that's not my thing. I hate fucking merchandise. I just into the music." And I respected that more than anything. I was like, totally cool. Please pass this on to any bands that you might know that might be interested.
Yeah, that's actually amazing.
Yeah, so, you know, it's reaching different people slowly, but I feel like there's more that could be done. So if anyone's listening, if you want to email your favourite mainstream band, you know, any Green Day fans are out there who want to send a message to Green Day and say, fucking do this, you know, then that'd be great. If I get a message at 2 a.m. from Billy Joe, whatever his name is, going, "We want to join Punks Against Sweatshops," I'll know we've had an impact today.
Okay, so it's more than an hour now, and if anyone watching this wants to ask any question in the web chat, now is the moment, or we can just call it a day.
Well, I can keep talking if you like. I can just rant on and on. If I get another beer inside me, I'll talk till 2 in the morning. I'm just trying to think if there's
anything else that you forgot?
So again?
Anything else? Probably you forgot something?
I'm trying to think if there's anything I forgot, but... Well, I should do the plug, is we have merchandise available. We do, we started, because I still work with No Sweat, so No Sweat have started a t-shirt project where they connected with this group Operaggio, who I mentioned earlier, in Bangladesh. Operaggio is a factory that was set up by the survivors of the Rana Plaza disaster. If anyone doesn't know what that is, back in 2013, a garment factory in Bangladesh collapsed. It was like 7 stories, and about 5 or 6 factories in this big building. It was completely built, you know, they cut every corner when building it, and after a few years the building collapsed, and 1,000 people got killed in the collapse of the building. It was an absolute horrific tragedy. They were digging bodies out for weeks. You know. Some of the survivors from that got together with some labour rights activists, and where they were sort of fundraising. It was this interesting thing about solidarity and charity. The labour rights activists were initially doing kind of charity in the sense they were calling out to the world to get donations to help these poor people that have had, faced this horrific incident, which is commendable in that you were literally helping someone in the most horrific circumstances. But what they realised after a short amount of time of getting money to give to people so they could feed themselves was this wasn't the answer they needed, because if this money stops, these poor people that are in this situation are going to be abandoned. So what they did was they decided to form their own workers' co-op and start a factory themselves. And the idea was they'd be paid a living wage, they get decent hours and decent conditions, and they have their own trade union, they get a share of the profits and stuff like that. So Operaggio started and created this small factory making clothes and stuff. And over the last 7 years, they've now grown into this quite a big factory. It has about 100 people in it operating and making clothes, people working for a living wage and decent hours, getting a share of the profits. And the profits that the factory make, they've invested in projects in the countryside to help people in the countryside get access to clean water and stuff like that. So there's a whole solidarity movement going on with them. Well, No Sweat connected with them to source t-shirts, this ethical t-shirt idea. They import t-shirts from Operaggio, made by them, blank t-shirts, and sell them wholesale to bands. So bands can buy the t-shirts from them, print on them, and sell them at gigs. So we, obviously, in doing the Punks Against Sweatshops campaign, connected with No Sweat to reach that kind of activist network. And we printed our own t-shirts, and we have our own little logo of Punks Against Sweatshops, and there's this design on the back. This guy can an artist called Sawhorse, you can find online, done this amazing design of a skeleton on a skateboard. Nothing to do with sweatshops, but it looks cool. And you can go on our Bandcamp page, go to Punks Against Sweatshops, you'll find the album I mentioned earlier, which is called Give Sweatshops the Boot, which obviously is a play on the Give Them the Boot thing, the Hellcat album. It's volume 1, there's going to be a volume 2, so you can download that for pretty much for free, just donate what you can. And if you want, you can buy a t-shirt, which is made in Bangladesh by a workers' cooperative called Operation.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Another question here, like in countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, if we want to print any t-shirts or merch which is ethical, it's quite expensive, and if we put it at a high price, it's not affordable to most of the people in the scene. Is there any alternative besides starting our own co-ops?
I'd say the important thing to do is, I'm assuming there's still garment sectors in those countries, in the cities of those countries. If there is still people making clothes in factories in Bulgaria, Romania and Serbia, there are probably trade unions connected to them. They might not be very strong, they might be very small and not have many members. And what you can do is connect to those trade unions and see what you can do to support them. So reach out to them and say, we want to support you, find out how you can support them. Because the key thing that people have to take away is, whilst an ethical t-shirt is lovely and it's really cool, like you say, it can be expensive, right? Especially if you want organic cotton and all the rest of it, which is brilliant, but it gets expensive. The way to change that is by more workers getting a living wage, and the only way more workers get a living wage is by fighting for it. So the way that workers fight for it is by forming a union. So what Punks can do is, rather than just worry about what your shopping is, you can work out who the trade unions are in your cities to find out what support you can do. You can do solidarity work with them. So if you do a benefit gig in your town when COVID's over and we can all stand next to each other again, you can do a benefit gig for the local garment workers union in your city and invite the garment workers along to tell the crowd about what it's like to work in these factories, how much they earn, what conditions they face. And if you can do that, then you're doing a much better thing than simply buying a nice t-shirt that was made in decent conditions. I have a fly attacking me, sorry.
I think that was a great final of this talk. So, yeah, thank you very much. And anyone watching this, you can subscribe to the DIY Conspiracy YouTube channel, and we can do more talks with other people in the future. So,
right. If you want to speak to Azul Luzagara, I can't say his surname. Luzaraga, that's his surname. Check him out. Check out punkaddicts.com and see his situation. I'm sure he'd love to come and meet you guys and talk about what his situation is.
There is a question in the last moment from Simon. Hi, Simon. There aren't many ethical clothing companies. Why do you think this is such an ignored issue when related issues like environmentalism and veganism are so popular?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
So, there aren't many ethical clothing companies. Why do you think it's such an ignored issue while environmentalism or veganism are so popular?
Why there are not many ethical clothing companies?
Yeah.
I think it's hard to say. The clothing industry is it's a big business around the world. Like I said earlier, it's worth like $3 trillion or something. And because that is based on the exploitation of so many people, the fact is, and it's something that No Sweat came across very quickly, is when you want to do something decent, you want to pay a living wage, you get a product that costs more because you paid someone more to make it. That's basic maths. Yeah? If you pay someone 10p and your t-shirt costs 10p plus the cotton that was made. If you pay someone £2 to make something, your t-shirt costs £2 plus the cotton that's made. So when you go to sell it, you put the word out to people and go, oh, these are our products, it's made in good conditions. People ask, how much? And they then weigh up, well, that one costs this and that one costs this, but I'll go for the cheap option. So it's basic capitalism that you end up in a market where you've got to convince enough people that your product is worth spending more on than the cheaper one. And if you don't convince enough people, your company won't survive. So a lot of companies companies try and companies fail. Some succeed by managing to build a customer base and promote their product well enough, but many more don't. Whereas big companies, you're competing against massive companies like Primark, H&M, I don't know, whoever else is around Europe, CNA, all these big corporations that we'll see on the streets. They're selling millions, so you're competing in a tough market. So that is arguably, I think, why it's hard, why you don't see so many ethical clothing companies. But they are there. The problem you have to watch out for is what we call greenwashing, or even whitewashing. I suppose whitewashing is the original term, but greenwashing is where you get a company like H&M who tells you all about how ethical they are and how environmentally sustainable their new recycled t-shirt is. And it's all bollocks. When you look at the fine print of their annual reports and stuff, you'll see the small print that tells you that all the claims they're making don't actually amount to what they're promoting. What they're promoting is they're environmentally sustainable and their workers are paid a decent wage, and then you find out the environmental sustainability is just in the one shop in Madrid, not actually the factory in Bangladesh where it was made, but just we've got a really good factory, good shop in Barcelona that's really environmental, so we'll promote that and they'll tell you that. So it becomes this greenwashing thing. So of all the companies that do get out there, and as you hear more and more about ethical companies, you have to really look and scratch beneath the surface to see if it is genuine. And that's where campaigns like No Sweat, Clean Clothes campaign, Laid Behind the Label in the UK and other campaigns around the world, do that digging to find out who's actually who's being honest and transparent in their supply chain.
I think there is another angle to this question. Like, so many people are going vegan for the animals or zero waste for the environment, but they don't care so much about from where the clothing comes from. And also hear from the questions in the chat, but the processed vegan foods are also more expensive than non-vegan counterparts.
It's true, yeah. I mean, I'm a vegan and I spend a lot of money on food, more than I would do if I wasn't. And again, to be honest, I don't have much of an answer because I don't know too much about the mechanics. Like, why is a vegan burger that is essentially should just be beans more expensive than the life of a cow? It doesn't really make sense. But then you look at the industry that is pumping out millions of dead animals. The cost, when you've got production on that level, the costs are really low, and so you weigh up that compared to the price of beans, and maybe it turns out that that's why you end up paying more. Or it's just the other side to that is it's a money making, it's capitalism, Like when capitalism sees an opportunity to make money, suddenly everyone's promoting veganism. And right now, everyone's promoting veganism in the most ridiculous ways, like McDonald's coming out with their new plant burger or something. Never mind all the cows they're killing, eat the plant burgers. So it's hard to say really, but I think essentially capitalism is the problem. Like, if we can overcome capitalism, then you start getting better ways of organising society. But overthrowing capitalism is no small feat. It's better people than me have tried that have failed. So it's going to take a huge effort, sustained throughout years and years and years to get to that point. And it's one of those things that I think there was an anarchist in South America who once said something like, Like there's a dream of the revolution that is there. We might never reach it, but dreaming it and aspiring to work towards it is the purpose. Like that's the main part. The journey is more important than the destination. The destination you might never reach. You know? So while you're tucking into your more expensive vegan burger, think about the goal in the distant future.
Yeah, again from Simon, that what many leftists say, like there is no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, but I do think like cooperatives and things like that are a way forward. Like someone who has the ability to say that is probably not sitting at a sewing machine for 16 hours a day, you know, struggling to survive. They're probably in a more comfortable situation because no garment worker is sitting there thinking there is no ethical consumerism. They're like, I want a better wage, you know, so you can fight. You can do something like fight for a living wage. And these are incremental that you build on battles like this. You try and work on getting workers a living wage, work on forcing companies not to destroy the planet, and then we can force companies to do more. And then if we can organise a revolution on top of that, then great. But you need to do more than one thing at one time. I've never felt comfortable with the idea that you can sacrifice everything to the revolution. That, you know, don't worry about sweatshops, don't worry about veganism. When the revolution comes, brother, we will all be bollocks. But when the revolution comes, there'll be another fucking problem that we've got to overcome. There's always the problems of the future you can't even see until you get past the problems of now. So you break down the barriers now, like sweatshops, environmental destruction, and then in the years to come, if we do have a revolution, you'll find out there's some other bastard who wants to oppress you, and you've got to fight them in a way that you didn't even know existed. You know? That's my 2 cents for it.
Yeah, do you have any plans to work with punks from other parts of the world? You talked about Yangon in Burma, you talked about Chile.
Well, I'd say firstly we, to some extent, no, we'd love to, but there's only a small crew of us, there's only a handful of people here doing stuff, so trying to do everything is hard. But one thing that people can do is the film Punks Against Sweatshops was translated into about 10 languages. If it's not in your language and you speak English and would like to translate it, please get in contact with us and we'll send you the Word document. You can just type your language below each line and we'll put out a version in your language so you can help spread the word. If there are other people who want to find out more about what we've done around the trespass stuff, it's quite interesting because in England, that was all about rights to public space, and I can't speak for any other country, but I'm sure there are similar rights in other countries where you have right to public space, but you don't realise it. You can organise gigs in certain spaces, and that's a form of protest. So we can certainly give you some advice around that kind of stuff. But essentially, I feel like international punk solidarity needs to be a two-way communication. Like we will work with you as much as we can, but we want to see people just be inspired by other people. In the same way the rebel riot started their food with bombs work because they were inspired by the Indonesian people, who themselves are inspired by people, God knows where, maybe in the US or something like that. It's that solidarity comes in many ways. It can come just through an act of inspiration that can lead to something amazing like rebel riots. Yeah, and the punk collective in Burma, the work they do is phenomenal, and that's been inspired by other people doing equally amazing work. So that's how we change things. I can tell the beer's had an effect because I'm becoming really philosophical. Hang on, I'm going to quote the Cooling in a minute.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. And
no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting.
See you again.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.